this fall. So better than talking Packers with Steinbucker, I will tell you that. All right. Well, this is next to last for me, but there are 4 more. I hope you're not burnt out on parables yet. But we're starting a new chapter anyway. Things get a little serious. I know this is way too small for you to read unless you sit on close. So we've looked at parables of the kingdom, and we finished up parables of grace, which we all like. We turn the corner today to a more ominous tone, parables of judgment. And you hate to end on this. I mean, if you were doing this rhetorically, not chronologically, you would want to end with the grace stuff, right? End on the good, law, the gospel. But Jesus in his ministry, especially as he approaches Jerusalem in the end of his life, he takes on a more ominous tone. And the parables get more serious. They become parables of judgment. And you think, well, why is Jesus ending on a sour note? Well, he's not. Jesus is, he's trying to make people realize the stakes of what people say about him. It's a matter of the soul. And so we'll see that today, especially in the parable of the rich fool. And I've entitled today's lesson, Mammon, the Most Common Idol. And if you remember sitting with me through some vice and virtue stuff a couple years back, I make no apologies to say I've recycled a lot of material on greed for today, okay? And it wasn't necessarily just out of laziness, it's because this parable asks us to consider greed by this man's actions. Okay, good. Oh man, my timer, I don't know why it does that, it's okay. So I'll go ahead and start just by reading the parable of the rich fool, and everything else will be commentary on it. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And then the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God.'" So that's the parable there, and this is Rembrandt's photo of the rich fool. I think maybe later on I made a comparison of that picture with another more contemporary figure. I can't remember. So, all right. So let's look at the context, as Pastor Roland has done well to teach you. Context is important. What's the context for this? Well, a man is desiring his own share of the inheritance. And that seems fair enough, doesn't it? To want what is rightfully yours, what is due you. If the will says divide it between you and your brother, and the brother is not sharing with you your fair share, then it would be right to sort of get this dispute arbitrated. Many times rabbis would adjudicate disputes, and Jesus has already been recognized as someone who has authority, and so maybe he thinks, maybe Jesus can help me out. Maybe he will pronounce an authoritative word that will get me what I feel is coming to me. But Jesus' ministry is not about patching up injustices. I mean, ultimately it will be, and on the last day, but not necessarily in the interim. Jesus is more concerned, again, this tone of a parable of judgment. He's concerned about the final injustice, death, and raising up from it an entirely new and reconciled creation. And so that's what he's going to talk about. More than this earthly dispute about wealth, let's talk about what is supremely unjust, death, and how we can find a just resolution to our deaths. And so this is why he adds, guard yourselves against all covetousness. The word there is pleonexia, much having. The easiest translation of that in English is greed. Guard yourself against So covetousness, we would hear that word as just wanting in general. Wanting others' stuff. But there's more than this. It's a desire to have and store up, so to speak, which is exactly what's going on in the parable of greed. A person's life does not consist, however, in what belongs to him. So it's important for us to recognize that if we're being honest with ourselves, all of our life is a struggle to live. Because death is the ultimate reality, the story of our lives is a struggle to stay alive. If nothing else, if we have nothing else in life, we would at least need food, or else we would die. And so that is the most initial need to work. I mean, if you were ever raising a family and money was short, you would probably make sure your children had something to eat before you would pay a bill, right? The hierarchy of needs, survival comes before comfort and shelter. And so, because we know our days are numbered, that drives us to work to sustain our existence. And because that's the truth, we think that the more we have, the more buffered we are against our coming deaths, or against uncertainty in our lives, things that would threaten our existence. And so it just so happens then that greed, or avarice as it's sometimes called, is the name we give to grasping at things in this world to sustain our existence. And Jesus says, but that's not what life consists of. It's not about how much or how little you have. And so long as your sustainment or your focus is on sustaining this life, now here's the key point that's going to be hammered home many times before I shut up today. So long as our focus is on sustaining this life, we keep the real life of resurrection out of our reach. Or further from our reach, we'll say. Because we're all greedy and covetousness in some way. And so that's Jesus' lesson. And what he says here echoes what he says in Mark. I think I quoted this maybe earlier in church today. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? And think how that quote right there would speak to this brother saying, hey, tell my brother to divide his inheritance with me. Jesus could have looked at him and said, well, what would it gain you if you gained that inheritance but forfeited your soul? And so he changes things to a weightier matter, and he does so by telling this parable. So let's get into some opening thoughts here. First of all, Jesus refuses to adjudicate this family dispute over inheritance, but instead uses the man's question to take opportunity to focus on the danger of possessions. It was kind of like in the parable of the banquet when the guy said, oh, how blessed are those who eat at the eschatological banquet, or the end times banquet of the Lord. Isn't it great to have a seat there? And Jesus goes, let me tell you who's going to be at that table. The lame, the lame, the crippled. And the man's going, I didn't hear him say me. So Jesus uses an utterance to say, all right, your mind's over here. I'm going to take you over here. So he tells this example of why we should be on guard. Wealth is one of the many obstacles that will face a disciple of Jesus. This parallels the warning offered in the parable about the soil. The parable of the soil is about the trials and riches of the world. You remember the weeds are the riches and cares of the world that can choke out faith. So Jesus is just saying the same thing in another way here, right? You might even say wealth is maybe the primary obstacle that faces a disciple of Jesus. We'll see later somewhere in this lesson, pride is often considered the main obstacle to faith, because pride is the ultimate relying on myself instead of relying on Jesus. But sometimes pride and greed are both considered sort of equal in their ability to choke out faith. Following this parable will be instruction about trusting in God. Don't be anxious about what you'll eat or what you'll put on. Your Heavenly Father knows you need these things. Consider the birds. Consider the lilies. God feeds the birds and He clothes the lilies, and yet aren't you more valuable than they are, right? Aren't you more valuable than they are? Your Father knows you need them. And so at the end of this parable, afterward, so some concluding thoughts, some summary statements are some things Jesus says that we're very familiar with, and we might not have recognized they come on the heels of this parable, right? So your Father knows you need these things. Stop worrying about them, in other words. Seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. We're probably more familiar with, Matthew's more poetic version, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Luke's version isn't so eloquent, but it's saying the same thing. Fear not. See, isn't it about fear? Fear ultimately of death or not surviving that drives our greed. Fear not, Jesus says. It's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Another one that we hear probably better in Matthew's words, store up treasure in heaven where there are no thieves or moths. See, treasure on earth can be stolen, possessions on earth can rot away, but not so the treasure you'll have in heaven. And then this one, which kind of is going to drive us to our next section, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. In other words, where you put your money is what you believe in. And so this shifts our discussion in the direction of idolatry. And Luther will, spoiler alert, call wealth the most common idol. All right, let's see here. What's coming next? My handouts don't always match my... I think the last one, I'm just going to do a handout. No charts. Last night, the charts didn't work for the sermon. And if you were in 8 o'clock this morning, you would realize that if there was ever a sermon that depended on a chart for you to follow along, it was this morning's. And I said, why do you do it? Pastor Roland preaches perfectly fine sermons Sunday after Sunday without charts. Why do you consider, live by technology, die by technology? All right, so I'm on the handout. I'm on point 3a. This parable and judgment parables are concerned not solely with how to live, but the state of one's soul. The state of one's soul. And so, like I said, judgment parables ramp it up a little bit. This isn't just living kingdom living here below. This is about living in such a way that you do not forfeit the blessings God wants to give you. We live out of control lives, fully dependent on God. All attempts to take control of our lives are simply foolish. Simply foolish. So look at this, the state of one's soul. Look what this guy says to himself. He says, and I will say to my soul, or my psyche, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Eat, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you. Notice the emphasis on soul. That's what's at stake here, not just how much you have here below or what kind of lifestyle you have or how healthy you are. This is about eternity. And again, we hear echoes of Jesus' teaching in other places. Matthew 10:28. Don't fear those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. So when I was, this sounds so pretentious, but when they wouldn't let me title my book what I wanted to, and we decided on Battle of the Soul, one thing I didn't like about that was because there's a tendency today to denigrate the value of the body, right? That all that matters is the soul in heaven with Jesus. And it's like, no. The body is what's going to be raised up on the last day. Your body is just as important with your soul. Body and soul, that's what the human being is. So you call a book Battle of the Soul, but some of those things are your body. The lust, the gluttony, those are very bodily things. So it's not just a battle of soul stuff. It's a battle against your flesh, the sinful flesh. And yet it was biblical because Peter said, abstain from the desires of your flesh, which wage war against your soul. And see, so whether it's a bodily sin or a kind of more of a soul-based sin, the state of your soul is what's important and going on there, because if the soul is saved, the body will eventually be reunited to it. And Jesus uses that same language here, you don't want body and soul to be destroyed in hell, right? The body is going to die, so don't fear those who are going to kill it. That's going to come. You don't want your soul killed. All right, so now we transition into a little thought of greed. A good way to introduce this is Jeremiah 6:13. From the least of them to the greatest of them, from the bottom of society all the way to the top, everyone is greedy for unjust gain. Okay? So the rich want to get richer, and the poor want what the rich have. It doesn't matter where you fall, middle class, poverty, or top of the ladder. Everyone wants a little more. From the priest to the prophet, right? Even the holy people, everyone deals falsely. Jeremiah is trying to say here, don't pretend you're not greedy. Everyone is, right? So what is the idea of greed? And this is where I'm hopelessly stealing from several years ago. Well, greed is simply the desire for more. That's kind of the idea of pleonexia, or covetousness, in our reading today. The Vice tradition often talked about avarice, retaining, or accumulating. I really don't think there's too much of a difference. You remember this? Scrooge McDuck. See, I grew up with DuckTales in the 80s, and he just had a big money bin that he dove in. He just stored it up. He just wanted to have it all right there so that he could look at it and enjoy it. See? So same character, different story. Ebenezer Scrooge, he wants more. He doesn't even enjoy what he has. He just wants more. So that if there's a difference between avarice and greed, that might be it. Do you want it just to, I like to sit in my office with all my books around me, there they are. Or, I just want more so that I can watch it go up and up and up. And, I took my thing off. I had a thing on here that said if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's still a duck. It's still greed. How about the young on the faces of greed here? This is great. No other vice, with the exception of perhaps lust, receives as much cultural indoctrination as greed. Okay? So the billboards of the ladies scantily clad, that indoctrinates lust. But everything else is indoctrinating greed. And she says this is what greed can look like: an overflowing shopping cart or a single purchase, an aggressive or a conservative stock portfolio, credit card debt or a savings account balance, locked away prized possessions or garages full of junk and good deals. And what is she saying there? We are all greedy. We just mask it in different ways, right? Someone that's a spendthrift, look, I don't buy all that junk these other people have. I'm simple, streamlined. Why? Because there's still more left in my bank account, see? You like the high number in the bank account. This person likes the full house. See? Different faces of the same problem. And so it's easy for us to say, well, I'm not like that. So-and-so's like that. See what they do, but not me. Well, hold up the mirror a little harder, look at it a little longer, and examine where greed might be getting your goat. Biblically, greed is considered the desire of the eyes. 1 John 2, this is a good little verse here to think through how sin is in our lives. All that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, I mentioned gluttony and lust, the desires of the eyes, greed, money, and the pride of life. Pride, envy, anger, I'm a better judge than God is. These things are not from the Father, but from the world. Okay? Luther says this: many are the allurements of the eyes. I believe, however, here that avarice is meant most of all. The eyes are satisfied with other things, but they are not satisfied with the accumulation of gold. Well, they always lust for more, such as large numbers of estates, fields, and houses. Avarice is not content with the things it uses. No, it desires even things it can never use. And so that was actually Luther's reflecting on 1 John 2:16. You have heard it said, and I'm sure many times, that you were taught that money is the root of all evil. And maybe you even had someone say, whoa, 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 not money. Money is just a tool. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. The more wanting, the pleonexia, the greed, the covetousness, the avarice. And so Luther will say, okay, avarice and pride at the core are the root of all evils. Per Paul's own admonition against greed, it is the root of all evils. He says the root and first heaviness is greed, from which sprouts wrath, envy, pride, malice, and practically all the works of the flesh. And so the Bible and even Luther will say, yeah, pride is a problem, but if we're going to be honest about what the Bible says, money is just as big a problem. Greed is related to the seventh commandment. The seventh commandment, of course, is don't steal, or stated positively, protect and guard the possessions of others. And Luther will say that the seventh commandment belongs, in the seventh commandment belongs all that is taught about avarice, fraudulent gain, deceit, craftiness, allowing harm to happen, etc. This commandment has a work which includes very many good works while opposing many vices. It fights not only against theft and robbery, but against every kind of sharp practice which men perpetrate against one another in matters of worldly goods, for instance, greed, etc. And so Luther sees greed and the want for more as fighting against a commandment that would have us uphold and support the possessions of others. So we love our neighbor by promoting and protecting their property, not desiring it. And I think that maybe I can skip over these meanings in the seventh commandment. Yeah. We should fear and love God so that we do not scheme to get our neighbor's inheritance or house or take away our neighbor's possessions. Lots of good stuff from the catechism there. How are we doing on time? Oh gosh, I'm almost running out of time. Maybe I should read them all. All right, well, we'll go on to the insatiability of greed. I'll spend a little more time there. So what is insatiable? There were these guys, I won't name them because I don't want you to Google them and know about them. There's a group of rogue pastors in the synod that have a little blog, and I honestly haven't looked at it in probably 5 years, so I've mostly forgotten about it. But if ever you wanted to argue with them about a point they were making, they would argue with you till eternity. Right? There's no thing you could show them that's going to undo the confidence they have in their mind that they're right and you're wrong. And I had a friend one time was commenting on another friend who was getting into it with some of these people online, and he said, just stop. These guys are insatiable, right? And I thought, that's a great use of that word, insatiable. You can't, they never get their fill of debating with you, and I suppose we're all that way a little bit. Insatiability is you can never have enough. You're never full, and that's what the ancients and probably what we should realize about the nature of greed, right? And so like Luther says this. This is just a great quote. It's worth reading. This is from his lectures on Habakkuk. All right? The more money acquired, the greater the greed. Man can never be sated with wealth, but his appetite for it grows and grows. And at the same time, the prophet also shows us the disposition of the human heart when it covets goods and honor, namely, the more it has, the more it wants. If it possessed the entire world, it would like to have 2 worlds. And if it had 2, it would like to have 10. In short, when hell and death are sated, then a greedy heart too will have enough, but not before. Luther just has a way with words. Therefore, we must not give thought to finding ways to satisfy greed, death, and hell, giving them so much that they will say enough. No, greed must be killed as death and hell are killed. And it works like this. You know, when you're first starting off and you don't have 2 nickels to rub together, you think, hey, once I make enough to pay the bills and maybe take a little vacation every year and have cars that don't break down all the time, I will have made it. You know, I'll be so content. But you know what happens? You finally sort of get there, and then you start to notice, you know, my house isn't as new as that new neighborhood they just put up. Boy, I bet they're not dealing with, like, you know, should we replace the windows, or these pipes are corroded. You know, gosh, it'd be nicer to have a more newly built home, right? Or, man, you know, this car is great, but I rode in so-and-so's car the other day, and man, do you know that the seats like inflate when you go around the corner and hold you in place? That'd be really nice to have. Or heated seats in the winter. Ooh, right? Yeah. Now, like, even the midline cars are coming with all these things, right? It's like, no, I don't want them. It just costs me more. But they told me to get a warranty on the most recent car I bought, because they said, this car does everything for you, which means when that stuff stops working, it's really expensive to replace it. But you know how it is. You think, like, hey, when I arrive at this future envisioned state, I will be content. But there's always the next step. There's always something more you can want. And because the ancients recognize this, and Scripture does this, what you got to do is just get out of the wanting game altogether. The key is not to say, when I reach this point, I'll be content, but to say, I am content right now. And if God wants to raise my boat over the years, oh, so be it. But whatever state I find myself in, I will seek contentment, because the quest for more is going to distract me from serving my neighbor. It's going to be bad for my soul, and furthermore, it will never be fulfilled. It's insatiable. Evagrius, who you may not remember, but I like Evagrius, because Evagrius is the one who started the vice tradition in the church. So I really like Evagrius. He said this: as the sea is never filled up, even though it takes in a multitude of rivers, so the desire of the avaricious person cannot get full of riches. He doubled his wealth and wants to double it again. See, Luther saying the same thing. I bet Luther never read Evagrius, because it wasn't even translated when Luther was around. He wants to double it again, and he does not stop doubling it until death puts a stop to his endless zeal. And then, if you want a more scriptural basis, how about Habakkuk? His greed is as wide as Sheol, like death. He never has enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects them as his own peoples. Ooh, now we move into new territory here. Habakkuk is saying, greed gathers stuff, but ultimately it gathers people. In other words, our greed doesn't just impact us, it impacts our neighbor. Okay? So for every Scrooge, there's a Bob Cratchit trying to keep his hands warm with one piece of coal. Luther writes about this as he exposits Psalm 127. He says, I selected this psalm because it beautifully turns the heart away from covetousness and concern for temporal livelihood and possessions toward faith in God. And in a few words, teaches us how Christians are to act with respect to the accumulation and the ownership of this world's goods. For not only the evangelists, but all the prophets as well, complain that covetousness and concern with this world's goods hinder the gospel from greatly bearing fruit. When money's our focus, God's mission is not our focus. And it is rather clear what the focus is in this parable. So I know you can't see this that well. I'm sorry about the blue, but I underlined anytime I or my is referenced in this parable. And I believe the count is 12 times. That's right. So the man's wealth itself is not condemned as much as is his accumulation solely for himself, right? I will say to my soul, you have ample goods. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. See, that's all about me. It has nothing to do with my neighbor, right? It has nothing to do with my neighbor. Greed has been called the driving force of capitalism, and I know I'm treading on thin ice here with you full-blooded patriotic Americans. But it's important to know that the biblical witness on lending with interest is that it's a dangerous, it has a danger of exploiting others, okay? So Luther was beginning to see the banking system with the Fuggers in Germany and the idea that, okay, I'll lend you a little money and you'll pay me back a little more. And many people, Luther was just against it altogether. But why? Because he felt it was too easy to use that setup to exploit the neighbor, right? If Luther could have seen down the line and says, okay, well, the bank's taking a little risk too. I mean, some people do foreclose and not pay their loans back, so there's risk on both sides. No one's being overly exploited here. It's possible Luther would have said, hey, look, maybe there's a practice of this that can be acceptable in our world. But at the time, he didn't have experience behind him. So what does he say? He says, lending at interest at least gives the occasion for avarice, by which every window and door to hell might be opened. See, it's about the soul here. Because of his avarice, therefore, goods must be priced as high, much higher than the greater need of the other fellow will allow, so that the neighbor's need becomes, as it were, the measure of the good's worth and value. And so he's saying, look, if someone really needs something, they might just price it so high because they know they're desperate. And we see this happen, right? And we have laws against price gouging, but sometimes people get away with it. He wrote a whole treatise on trade and usury in 1524. He said it should be known in our times, which the Apostle Paul prophesied would be perilous, that avarice and usury have not only taken a mighty hold on the whole world, but have had the nerve to seek out certain subterfuges by which they might freely practice their wickedness under the guise of a fair dealing. In other words, if you read the Large Catechism and Luther's moral treatises, he's saying, look, we say things like, well, I'm just taking care of my family, right? I'm just trying to run a business and keep it afloat, and we will mask our greed in all sorts of ways and stories we tell ourselves. Let's just share a couple more here and then we'll move on. De Young, from her book, Glittering Vices, says, greed incites us to the obstinate refusal to meet even the basic demands of justice, as we opt to keep more than our share. Avarice is a sin directly against one's neighbor, since one person cannot overabound in external riches without another person lacking them. Now, this is very much on the surface would seem like a zero-sum game. Are you guys familiar with that term? Zero-sum game means that there's a winner, +1, there must be a loser, -1, and so the sum of those is what? 0. So that's the idea that there's only so much to go around. For every winner, there must be a loser. Well, world history has shown us, as the capitalist experiment has expanded across the globe, that it is possible actually to create more wealth. And so some people can have more, and other people can also have more. So then the argument becomes about the disproportionality. The rich get way richer, and the poor just get a little bit better off. So we can argue till we're blue in the face about this, and we're kind of stepping into politics here, which I don't mean to do, but just notice that if we're going to be champions of capitalism, based on the experience of the world over, that's fine, but always bear in mind that avarice is lurking beneath the surface, and as Christian people, we need to be aware of that. And Pope John Paul gets at, I think, a greater part of the problem here. He says making money the measure of all things is really a cover for making human beings, because after all, they're the makers and controllers of money, the measure of all things, including the value of other human beings. This instrumentalization and commodification of human beings by others reveals a deeper concern between avarice and injustice. It's not just about stealing and hoarding, he said. What it actually means is I value you because of your commercial worth and potential benefit to me. You are not a human with dignity in and of yourself. You are valuable to me only insofar as I can use you in my life to further my life. See? Seeing people as a means to an end instead of a valuable end in of themselves. That's the greater danger. We can argue about wealth and capitalism, interest, and all that stuff, but do I see human beings as just tools to prop myself further up? Or are you valuable to me no matter what the world would say about your worth? John Paul was a Catholic man, and listen, I mentioned the word Roman Catholic in a sermon one time, and I had like 10 people stop me after church and tell me, Catholics are not Christians, and I said, oh God, that's a lot of people. I didn't even know that, but so I'm not Catholic, but I did have a deep respect for John Paul, his theology of the body. He knew a lot about marriage for someone who was never married, and also he had a very good moral theology, so I will cite him occasionally, and if you want to tell Matt Harrison I'm a heretic, that's okay. All right, okay. The futility of greed, where are we? Okay, good, we're good on time. Can we stop greed? Luther didn't think so. He said, in fact, greed is so widespread, that's futile for me to even preach against it. Now, I'm sure he was speaking a little. He still preached against greed, but I think he just kind of sometimes threw his hands up in the air. But here's why else wealth is futile. When people have devoted all their care and effort to scraping together possessions and wealth, what have they accomplished in the end? This is kind of like themes from the sermon today, right? You will find that they have wasted their effort and toil. Even if they pile up great riches, these have turned to dust and blown away. They themselves never found happiness in their wealth, nor did it ever last to the third generation. And so Luther says, if you get lucky enough that your own children will manage your wealth as wisely as you did, many will just blow it away and manage it really poorly. But even if your children manage the wealth you gave them well, good luck with your grandchildren, right? He says, you just watch history, right? It's what you so carefully built, whose will it be tomorrow, he tells the rich man. See? If you ever go through Transfer the Blessing, they will tell you, consider giving to a cause, your church, something like that, with some of your inheritance. Don't just take all of it and divide it up among your children, because what they know and what you've seen is, usually that means children end up never speaking to one another again. It's one of the greatest curses that you can have.